The announcement that stops a war room. The alarms on Bristle 9 screamed like angry thunder, and every officer in the command deck shouted orders that collided in a storm of panic. Yet amid the flashing lights and the smell of burnt circuits stood Arya Chen. Her eyes steady, her hands calm as she rerouted power lines across the holotable she was Starborn trained to think under fire, her pulse never rising above what she could control beside her towered Carrot of the Houndborn. His fur rippled, with static from the shield generators, his tail a metronome of impatience and focus together. They had held 2 sectors through pure coordination. Now the Council demanded another miracle. The crag fleets were descending again, and the outer satellites had fallen. A counselor barked for retreat, but Carrot raised his paw and spoke with that deep resonance that silenced every argument before it could grow. He said there will be no retreat, for the pack protects its den, and in this den there are hearts that must not be abandoned. He turned toward Arya, his golden eyes unreadable, and then with total simplicity he said, "You should prepare, human. We are having puppies." The room froze. Someone dropped a tablet. A young tech stammered the translation filters. "Must be broken." Arya blinked, sure she misheard, but Carrot stood proud, his voice unwavering. The bond was made, the sequence confirmed. Our offspring will carry both lines, they are ours. The words rippled through the chamber like shockwaves. Half the officers laughed nervously. Others whispered about forbidden genetics and weaponized biology. The Houndborn pack code forbade random pairings. Their bonds were sacred, ancient, chosen only after battle honor and shared instinct. Arya opened her mouth to speak but found no words. She had shared blood in the field with Carrot, a battlefield healing pact. Nothing more. Or so she thought. Her human mind searched for logic. There was none. Her chest felt tight. Yet, Carrot was calm, unflinching. He said, "The pups will come in their time and they will be warriors of both sons. That is why we fight." The council chair slammed a fist on the table, accusing humanity of manipulation, calling it a stunt to control Houndborn genetics. Arya forced her breath steady and said, "We have no time for gossip. There are 30,000 civilians trapped in the lower valley. The Crag Queen will reach orbit in 2 hours. If we argue here, they all die." Carrot nodded, tail low in approval. He said, "My mate is correct. We defend the valley, then we can talk of miracles." The word mate rolled through the room again, stirring disbelief, but no one could challenge the focus in his tone. Outside the windows, the night sky burned green from plasma strikes. Arya ran through tactical feeds, her voice slicing through panic like a blade. She ordered power relays toward the North Battery and rerouted drone patrols to bait the Crag scouts. She caught glimpses of soldiers whispering, staring between her and Carrot. Some faces amused, others fearful, but she ignored it. She was trained to adapt, and right now survival mattered more than reputation. Carrot followed her movements like a second shadow, predicting each adjustment. They moved as if one thought drove 2 bodies. When the outer alarms blared again, they moved to the observation deck to see the Crag advance columns shimmering through the storm. Arya's fingers danced across the control pad, opening thermal vents to mask civilian clusters. Carrot tilted his head, listening to vibrations through the floor. His species sensed motion in stone, through claws honed over generations. He pointed toward a low ridge. He said, "They come there through the riverbed. They smell weakness." Arya marked coordinates and called in artillery. She said, "Then let us smell strength." Minutes later, thunder shook the horizon and bright arcs split the darkness. The first Crag line shattered, but more poured behind, and above them the Queen's massive form glowed red on radar, a mountain of armored Chitin. Arya whispered to herself, "If she lands here, this planet dies." Carrot answered softly, "Then we make sure she never lands." His eyes softened for a brief second, and he said softly, "I did not mean to startle you about the pups, but truth must be spoken even in war. You carry the scent of courage. The pack recognizes what it trusts." Arya almost laughed through disbelief. This creature saw her as family partner, future parent of a lineage that should never have been possible. But somehow, amid the chaos, it gave her strange clarity. If something new could be born from their bond, maybe there was hope for this fractured alliance. Maybe war itself could be rewritten. She shook off the thought and tightened her gloves. She said, "We still have a mission." Carrot bared teeth in what passed for a grin and said, "Then let us defend our den hours later." The valley glowed with defensive fire lines. Civilians moved through tunnels under Arya's orders. The air reeked of metal and ion smoke. The council sent last-minute commands, but communication lagged under interference. Arya worked without pause, shoulder to shoulder with soldiers and hounds alike, while Carrot ranged the perimeter, his voice rising in rally howls that turned fear into rhythm. The defenders started to mirror his pattern, breathing in the same beat. The sound echoed through tunnels, hearts aligning instinctively. When dawn's first light touched the ridges, the crag assault faltered on barricades made of scrap drones and redirected plasma vents. Every move that night had been coordinated between human precision and animal instinct. Arya stood at the edge of the command ridge, covered in dust, watching the enemy retreat. She should have felt triumph, but all she felt was the slow realization that Carrot's words had changed everything. She was part of something larger than human command structure, now part of a story that no council could script. She looked at him across the dawn. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, they both knew that family had already begun, not by choice but by shared survival. The war was not over, but the den was born that morning, and with it the promise that whatever came next would belong to more than one species. It would belong to all who dared to call each other. Pack law versus human heart. The sun of Bristle 9 climbed pale through smoke and morning haze, casting a dim orange glow across the battered valley. The defenders were exhausted, yet alive. Arya Chen walked through the camp corridors where medics patched wounds and children whispered stories of the night before. She could hear Carrot's voice outside, sharp, commanding calm, as he instructed a group of houndborn and human soldiers in joint patrol tactics. His voice carried the rhythm of authority, not harsh but steady. Every phrase a beat that hearts could follow. Arya paused to listen, realizing how easily the two groups now moved together, as if the old divisions had dissolved overnight. But deep in her chest, confusion still burned. The word puppies echoed in her thoughts like a strange melody, equal parts fear and wonder. When she stepped out into the open, Carrot turned instantly, sensing her even before she spoke. His ears twitched. His tail gave a slight arc that meant greeting among the houndborn. He said softly, "You did not rest. You should. Humans need rest." And Arya replied quietly, "Not today. Not when command is already questioning both of us. The council's transmission came through an hour ago. They want you off-world." Carrot's jaw tensed, the fur along his neck stiffening. "Pack law forbids leaving a world before all young and wounded are secured," he said. "If there are hearts in danger, I stay, and if the council demands my withdrawal, they defy the pack itself." Arya exhaled slowly. She had expected defiance, but not the solemn reverence that followed. Carrot lifted his paw to the sky and spoke in ritual cadence before the gathered soldiers. "I am Carrot of the Houndborn. I am bonded, and I am bound where my mate stands. I stand where the unborn rest. I defend. None may call me back until safety is sung by every survivor." His words carried through the wind. The houndborn soldiers thumped their chests in unison, repeating the final line, until even some of the human troops joined the chant. It was not rebellion. It was a declaration of loyalty that rippled through morale, like wildfire. Arya felt eyes on her. She had not asked for this. She never sought leadership or symbolism. But war cared little for preference. She stepped forward, her voice clear, saying, "If the pack stays, then I stay too. But we do it by strategy, not by blind defiance." She turned to the tactical screens mounted on a crate. The valley was outlined in holographic light. She pointed to the north ridge, showing the enemy's next likely push. She explained how the crag used pulse echoes to map biological presence, and how to distort it by scattering heat signatures with scrap drones. She ordered joint teams, human and houndborn, to plant makeshift emitters. The soldiers moved instantly with new purpose. Hours bled together into rhythm. Arya worked alongside them, repairing circuits and adjusting frequencies, while Carrot moved through lines, teaching breathing, control through tail flicks and ear tilts. His people's ancient nonverbal code, humans began to imitate those gestures awkwardly. At first, then smoothly, until each mixed patrol could communicate without words. Arya watched them share water food. Even laughter, the air changed from fear to kinship. She realized that despite politics, something real was forming a unity, born not from treaties but shared survival. Later that day, a supply convoy was reported missing near the canyon rim. Arya and Carrot led a small unit to investigate. The terrain was broken, scarred by craters, wind whistling through metal skeletons of old transports halfway through the canyon. They found scorch marks and torn containers. Suddenly movement shimmered above. A ridge crag scouts, half hidden by their translucent armor, burst from cover, plasma spikes slicing the air. Arya dove for a fallen shield generator while Carrot lunged forward, claws flashing. He moved with terrifying precision, each leap calculated to draw fire away from her. She used the few seconds he bought to reroute power through the generator's core, creating a pulse that blasted static across the canyon. The crag's camouflage failed, and the squad opened fire, coordinated heartbeat and breath guiding their aim. When silence finally fell, Carrot stood over a fallen enemy, his muzzle streaked with blood and dust. He looked back at Arya, his expression unreadable. She felt the adrenaline drain, leaving only exhaustion and an ache behind her eyes. She said, "You risked yourself too far," he answered. "Risk is what keeps us breathing. We move through it together." She shook her head. "Humans don't think that way," and he replied, "Then humans should learn, for packs survive not by being fearless but by sharing fear and overcoming it." By the time they returned, the camp greeted them with cheers, stories already spreading faster than facts, calling it the Canyon Charge, a joint defense of legend. The morale surge spread like energy through the lines. Arya tried to downplay it, but the soldiers wouldn't let her slip away. Children handed her pieces of scavenged metal shaped like medals, calling her Den Mother. She tried to laugh it off, but Carrot's look stopped her. His eyes glowed with quiet pride. He said, "The title suits you. Our people honor those who guard the young. You do that without command, without reward." Night came slowly that evening, with stars half hidden by drifting smoke. Arya sat by the generator fires, watching sparks rise. Carrot joined her, settling beside her with a tired groan. His tail brushed against her boot. She glanced at him and said, "Do you really believe it, that something could be born from us?" He looked toward the horizon and said, "The bond was not planned, but the pack does not question the song. When it begins, it simply follows the rhythm. I do not know what the pups will be, but I know they will carry courage from both sons. That is enough." For a long time they sat in silence, only the low hum of power lines filling the air, when orders came through again from the council demanding a status report. Arya recorded a message, calm and deliberate. She said, "Bristle 9 holds the line and the den stands ready. We await reinforcements and clarification on leadership transfer." She hesitated, then added, "And regarding the bond between Captain Carrot and myself, it is under observation, not command control. We proceed with mission priority first." She sent it without further comment. At dawn the next day, as they reviewed patrol routes, a signal spike hit the sensors. Enemy movement massing to the east. Carrot's ears rose, and he said, "The Queen tests us again, but this time she will find no weakness." Arya nodded, her mind already in motion, calling for formation shifts and shield grid adjustments. She caught Carrot's gaze, and for a fleeting heartbeat, they both smiled, tired, but ready. The pack was no longer theory. It was real, and it would fight. As one she whispered, "Let them come." And Carrot answered, "Let them learn what family means in war, building a den in a war zone." The storm rolled in from the northern ridge, heavy and metallic, the wind carrying the smell of ozone and dust, the kind of air that made machines hum louder and soldiers glance upward with unease. The valley of Bristle 9 had become a half-broken, half-alive fortress, its cliffs glowing faintly from damaged shield emitters. Arya Chen stood on top of the ruined mag rail bridge, watching the smoke rise and thinking that war had turned her entire life into a pattern of motion, survival, and adjustment. She had not slept in 2 days yet. Her mind kept building blueprints in the air. Paths, tunnels, power loops, defenses. It was what her training had carved into her, not just the instinct to fight, but to create systems under pressure. Carrot of the Houndborn joined her, his fur soaked from the rain, his nose twitching as he read the air. He said, "The scent of the crag is changing." They are hungry but not reckless anymore. They learn fast, Arya replied. Then we learn faster. Together they descended into the shattered subway system where she had started carving what the troops called the den. It was not just a shelter. It was a pulse hidden beneath the city. A web of life support, heat circulation, and communication routed through scavenged parts. She used old shield panels as insulation and redirected geothermal lines to create warmth the den was invisible to. Orbital scans masked by the ruined city above Carrot watched as human engineers welded metal beside houndborn builders, who moved like synchronized dancers, using paws and claws to anchor support beams. The den was taking shape from chaos. Arya crouched beside a holographic map pointing to gaps between collapsed tunnels. She explained that sound and heat were the greatest dangers the crag hunted not by sight, but by rhythm. Every heartbeat, every tremor. She told the engineers to reroute water lines near sleeping quarters to create white noise and to bury exhaust vents under mineral debris, to confuse thermal readers. Carrot listened and then added his own expertise. He had grown on a world of predators that hunted by scent, so he showed them how to layer smell, smoke, oil, and fur to create confusion patterns when mixed. The den became a living thing, a heartbeat that hid in plain silence. Days turned into weeks of hard work. Every soldier, every refugee played a part. Children carried small metal pieces and elderly farmers stitched cloth barriers to muffle echoes. Each new layer of construction made the den stronger, its walls thick with story and cooperation. Carrot and his houndborn patrols began teaching humans how to move without waste of motion, how to match their breathing to the rhythm of the ground. At first it felt awkward, but soon Arya noticed the difference. Her troops became quieter, faster, more aware. The human squads began calling themselves pack, not unit, not platoon. But pack, a word that once would have sounded strange, now felt natural. In the center of the den, Arya set up a command core, a repurposed reactor shielded with layers of broken drone hulls. The heat output mimicked background geology, making it nearly invisible. She named it Heartbeat, because that was what it was. Carrot helped her install resonance sensors that reacted to movement deeper in the tunnels. Their data patterns looked like waves on a calm ocean. Arya could track every group of soldiers, every civilian cluster by the rhythm of their steps and breath. One evening, as she checked readings, she heard a sound that made her pause. Laughter. Real human. Laughter echoing through the tunnels. It was the sound of children playing. They had turned broken drone shells into rolling toys, and the sight made her throat tighten. Carrot appeared beside her, his head low, as if listening to something beyond hearing. He said, "The den breathes like a living creature. Now it remembers who walks its halls." Arya smiled faintly and said, "It's working." Then her voice lowered. "Do you ever think what will happen when this ends, if it ends?" Carrot's tail brushed the ground slowly. He said, "End is a human word. Pack. Life has no end. It flows from parent to child, from howl to howl. Even if we fall, the rhythm continues. You should rest, den mother. Your heartbeat is too loud tonight." She almost smiled at the title that still embarrassed her, but part of her had begun to accept it. The den mother of a pack. That was not one species, but many. She looked over the glowing panels and saw hope, not victory, but endurance that was enough for now. Later, a scout team returned with grave news. They had intercepted crag transmissions revealing that the enemy had identified heat signatures near the southern aqueducts. Worse, the crag queen herself had arrived in orbit and established a nest deep beneath the ice shelf 200 kilometers north. Arya called an immediate council in the den command core. The KD human officers arrived, still dusted with grime. The houndborn entered with tails stiff and heads high. She projected the intercepted images across the room, showing the queen's massive shadow moving under the ice. Carret's ears flattened as he studied it. He said, "The queen hunts by seismic rhythm. If she senses our heartbeats, she will strike directly through the crust." Arya nodded, thinking quickly. "If she finds the den, she floods it. She will burn the tunnels with acid brine like she did on Theta Prime." Carrot growled a low note that silenced the room, then said, "We can mask the den further. But if she floods, we must redirect her flow back into the ice. It must freeze around her body." Arya turned that into a plan. They would extend their old mining pumps and reroute coolant pipes, creating a false pressure buildup, then vent it at the right moment to reverse the flood. She called it Project Denhold. For 3 nights, they worked without pause, sealing tunnels and building pressure. Chambers scavenging parts from abandoned rigs, the den vibrated with the effort of hundreds breathing and working in sync. Carrot patrolled without rest, his fur burned by acid spray when he crawled through flooded ducts to plant thermal traps. Aria worked beside him, sweat streaking her face as she calibrated the coolant vents. They barely spoke words unnecessary between them. Every gesture was understood when the crag attack came. The flood roared through the lower levels like liquid fire. Civilians screamed. Engineers fell back, but the pumps ignited in sequence. The counterpressure forced the brine upward through vents exploding out into the canyon, a geyser of toxic steam rising like a storm cloud. The den survived, battered, soaked, but alive. Aria stumbled through the wreckage, checking for survivors. She found Carrot near the main valve, his body covered in burns but still breathing. He looked up at her and managed a weary grin. He said the pups will have stories worth telling, and she laughed through tears because in that moment she realized he meant more than just unborn life. He meant everyone here, every soldier, every refugee, every child. The den was their litter, their pack, their future. The flood had failed. The Queen would learn that day that no force in the galaxy could drown a bond built on faith and shared breath. The den would stand, and with it the will of two hearts beating as one. The flood and the oath. The wind outside screamed over the shattered city like the ghosts of every fallen soldier on Bristle 9, but inside the den it was quiet and alive. The sound of metal creaking under stress mixed with the soft hum of recycled air. The flood had tested them all and what remained of the valleys. Defenders now gathered around the central heartbeat core where Aria Chen stood, her uniform. Torn, her hands scarred, but her eyes steady. Her gaze moved over the survivors, humans and hound-born alike, standing side by side, their fur and skin streaked with soot and dried blood, yet in their faces she saw not defeat but stubborn pride. They had held the den against the impossible. And in that victory something greater had been born. Carrot moved through the crowd, leaning slightly from the burns that still marked his flanks. His tail hung low, but his eyes were sharp when he reached Aria. He gave a slow nod that meant acknowledgement among his kind. No words were needed. The den still stood, the pack still lived. But Aria knew this was only a pause. The Crag Queen was not defeated, merely delayed, and her next strike would be worse. The scouts reported she had withdrawn to the northern ice shelf to gather her remaining spawn and summon reinforcements. Her plan was simple. She would crush the planet under waves of acid rain drawn from the atmosphere itself, a planetary cleansing. The council ship finally broke communication silence that evening, demanding reports and accusing Aria of insubordination for refusing to evacuate. She listened, in silence, to the distant voice of Admiral Laurent as he lectured her about protocol, then cut the feed with a single calm gesture. She had learned long ago that some battles were not worth words. Instead, she turned to the assembled officers and said, "The council will not save us. We save ourselves or no one does." Carrot bared his teeth in approval and his voice rolled through the hall, saying the pack does not wait for kings to command when the den is threatened. The pack stands together. The next days were filled with rebuilding and preparation. Aria ordered engineers to reroute shield power from the upper batteries to the den itself, reinforcing structural barriers while the outer defenses were turned into decoys to draw scans and bombardment. Carrot led mixed patrols across the ruins. His senses attuned to tremors beneath the ground. He could feel where the crag tunnels stretched like veins under the soil. At night, he taught the younger soldiers how to listen too, pressing their hands and paws to the stone until they could tell the difference between wind and movement. It was an ancient hound-born skill, and the humans learned fast. Necessity turned fear into focus. Aria barely rested, but when she did, it was in the heartbeat chamber surrounded by the quiet rhythm of machinery. One night she woke to find Carrot sitting beside her, his eyes reflecting the reactor's blue light. He said softly, "I sang the names of the fallen today. The air carries them now, and they will not be forgotten." She looked at him and asked, "Do you believe they hear you?" And he replied, "Belief is a sound that needs no ears." The pack remembers through the song. When one voice stops, another continues it until the end of time. The next morning brought new disaster as the den sensors flared with warnings. A council corvette had landed nearby carrying high-ranking officials who claimed to take command of the defense. They brought evacuation orders and demanded that Aria surrender tactical control. They wanted the den cleared and the civilians relocated to orbiting carriers. Arya stood silent as they explained their plan, which would abandon thousands outside the valley and leave the den exposed when they finished. She said with quiet, "Steal the den stays where it is, you leave if you wish, but we are not abandoning the people who trusted us." The lead official sneered, calling her reckless, and accused her of being compromised by alien influence before he could finish. Carrot stepped forward, towering over him, his voice deep enough to rattle the walls, saying, "She leads the pack and you are no pack to command her." The official reached for his communicator, but the surrounding soldiers, human and houndborn alike, stood firm there. Eyes cold, he saw there was no obedience here, only loyalty born from blood and survival. And without another word, he turned and ordered his people to retreat. Their ship left that same hour, leaving the den to its fate. That night, the crag came again, not in open assault but in waves of probing drones that hissed and screeched as they burrowed through the outer crust. Their acid drills cutting deep, the den shook under impact but held strong. Carrot commanded the outer guards through resonance calls while Arya coordinated energy redistribution to strengthen barriers through the chaos. A young houndborn trainee named Sarek broke formation to rescue trapped civilians. His armor melted from acid spray, but he carried 3 children back, before collapsing his fur smoking. His last words were soft and clear before his eyes dimmed the den lives. They buried him in the lower tunnels under the roots of the old reactor. Carrot sat beside the body long after everyone left, his tail wrapped around his paws, humming a low morning note that made the metal vibrate. Arya joined him after a while, not speaking. She simply placed a human medal beside the body and said quietly, "No child of this world will be forgotten, we'll carry them all." Then Carrot looked at her and said, "Our oath must be more than words. We vow that no cub, no child of any species will be abandoned again. That will be our law from now until the stars fade." Arya met his gaze and nodded solemnly. "I swear it." When dawn came, the soldiers gathered in the main chamber. Every member of the den, human and houndborn, stood together as Arya and Carrot repeated the oath aloud, their voices echoing through the tunnels, and every soldier raised a hand or paw in agreement. The vow spread like fire until even the civilians whispered it under their breath. From that moment, the den was not just a fortress, it was a sanctuary, bound by promise. In the hours that followed, new strategies were drawn. Carrot proposed using the enemy's own seismic tracking against them, by sending false vibrations through the frozen lakes, creating the illusion of multiple dens across the valley. Arya refined the plan with precision, adjusting the timing so that each false pulse would mimic the beat of living hearts. The crag queen would waste her fury on ghosts while the real den remained untouched. As the day faded, the last light of the sun filtered through cracks in the ruined ceiling, and Arya looked around at the faces of her people. Tired, scarred, determined, and she felt something shift deep inside her. The war had begun as a fight for territory, but now it was something far greater. It was a fight for family, for life, for every heartbeat that refused to be silenced. Carrot stood beside her, his silhouette outlined by the dim light, and said, "The storm is not done, Den Mother, but the pack is ready," she answered. "Then let it come. Because this time we do not run this time. We stand as one." The plan. Only a pack could run. The air above, Bristle 9 had changed the sky that once glowed orange with dust, now pulsed faintly with streaks of blue lightning, as the Crag Queen's storm engines gathered power. Each flash carried the smell of acid rain waiting to fall and dissolve anything. Still breathing deep within the den, Arya, Chen stood before the heartbeat core, surrounded by engineers, technicians, and pack warriors. The hum of machinery filled the air like the pulse of some massive beast, alive and aware. She traced her fingers across the holographic projection that displayed seismic data and energy waves. The Queen was tunneling closer again, and every minute her brood swarmed deeper into the crust. She could feel the vibration under her boots like a slow approaching, drumbeat. Carrot of the Houndborn stood beside her, his shoulders heavy but his eyes unwavering. He said, "The Queen smells our courage now, she will come for it." Arya replied, "Then let us make sure what she smells drives her to her own death." She had spent the past days studying the crag rhythm, how they moved, how they sensed heartbeats and breath, each creature attuned to the vibrations of life that pulsed through the ground. It gave them deadly precision, but it also made them predictable arias. Plan was born from that flaw. If the crag hunted by heartbeats, then they would give them 1,000 false ones. She called it the Echo Net, a system built from scavenged drones, thermal emitters, and timed sound pulses, all synced to mimic the heart. Rhythms of the den itself, she explained it to the command circle. Their eyes watching the glowing blue waveforms on the screen, the den would synchronize every living being to one metronome, each breath, each beat moving in time, while decoy signals, scattered across the frozen plains, created confusion. The queen would think the den was everywhere and nowhere at once. Carrot listened in silence, his ears twitching slightly, as if testing the concept through instinct. Finally, he nodded and said, "A pack hunts best when the prey forgets where the pack begins. Your idea makes the prey the queen. And that is the best hunt of all." Arya looked at him and said, "This will require everyone, even the civilians. They will need to keep perfect rhythm. No panic, no chaos." He bared his teeth in a grin. "Then we teach them the pack way." For 2 days and nights, training consumed. The den soldiers lined the tunnels, humans and houndborn side by side, practicing synchronized breathing, guided by rhythmic beats that pulsed through the speakers. Even the children joined, learning to breathe in unison, small chests rising and falling with the same steady pace. At first it was strange, but slowly a calm settled over the den. The rhythm became part of them, heartbeat, breath, and motion all aligned. Arya felt the difference herself, her pulse matching the soft thrum of the reactor, until she could no longer tell where her body ended, and the den began. Carrot moved among them, correcting posture and breathing. He demonstrated the old houndborn cadence used for stealth hunts, deep low growls followed by timed exhalations. Soon the tunnels echoed with the sound of hundreds moving as one Arya watched from a platform above. And for the first time since the invasion began, she felt hope, not a fragile wish, but a steady certainty forged by unity. This was no army. This was a living organism. Every cell connected, every motion purposeful. But as they prepared, an envoy ship appeared above the valley, marked with the crest of the Houndborn Council. Carrot stiffened his tail, lowering as he recognized the symbols. The emissary arrived through the storm, wearing ceremonial armor, silver and black. His voice carried across the den with authority, saying, "Captain Carrot, you are summoned to return to the homeworld. The council commands your presence. You carry sacred lineage now. The unborn of 2 bloods, they must be protected." Carrot's reply was low, but unyielding. "Places here, my pack fights, my mate leads. I will not abandon them." The emissary growled, "You defy the council and risk exile." Carrot's ears flattened, but he did not bow. He said, "I choose the law of the pack over the law of comfort. If exile is the price, I pay it gladly." Arya stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "This is not a time for politics. We are holding the line for every living soul on this planet. If you wish to help, stay. If not, take your shuttle and leave." The emissary hesitated, seeing the mixed ranks behind her, human and houndborn standing shoulder to shoulder. He knew he could not break this unity without dishonoring his people. He gave a curt nod and left, his final words carrying respect rather than anger. "Fight. Well, Den Mother, may the stars remember your courage." When the envoy was gone, Arya turned back to the plan. The Echo Net would deploy within hours. They spread the decoy emitters across the ice fields under cover of storm. Carrot led the outer team there, bodies wrapped in signal dampeners, his voice guiding through comms while Arya monitored from the heartbeat core. Each emitter pulsed faint blue on the map, forming a vast circle around the den. By dawn, the system was ready. She initiated the countdown. Every soldier, every civilian aligned with the internal rhythm. The pulse began low and slow, then rose to a steady cadence across the tunnels. The walls seemed to breathe. The lights flickered in time with thousands of synchronized hearts. For a moment, even the air felt sacred. Then the Crag Queen struck. The seismic shockwave tore through the ice like thunder. Every monitor in the den lit, red pressure spikes flared. The Queen's brood was moving faster than predicted. A swarm breaching from the Western Ridge area barked orders, sending defense teams to intercept. But the decoys had already started their work. False signals flaring across the landscape. The Queen's drones split, chasing phantoms of heat, and sound confusion rippled through their formation. Carrot's voice came through static, saying, "The plan works. She is blind," but there was strain in his tone, and in the background she could hear the echo of explosions. Arya called for his position, but the channel flickered. The external monitors showed one emitter cluster collapsing under assault if it failed. The rhythm would break and the Queen would sense the real den. She had no choice. She triggered secondary emitters, sacrificing power from the heartbeat core. The lights dimmed around her, but the rhythm continued still. She knew Carrot was out there holding the line. Hours passed like years. The den shook again and again, but the signal held. Then silence fell. The seismic readings flattened. The Queen had slowed, confused, surrounded. By echoes, she was trapped in her own hunting field. Arya exhaled for the first time in hours, but before she could call for confirmation, a new tremor hit. Stronger, deeper sensors screamed new movement beneath the ice, a secondary brood moving unseen. Carrot's last transmission came through fragmented, a growl half drowned in static. He said, "They are not finished. The brood tunnels from below we hold until the last breath." Arya stood frozen for a second, then turned to her team and said, "No one moves. The den holds the rhythm. No matter what, we will finish what we started and bring them home." She reached for the controls, rerouting power for what she knew would be the final sequence. The Queen had learned to fear them, but she had not yet learned that the den never stopped fighting once its heart began to beat. Dark tunnel, bright instinct. The tunnels of Bristle 9 shook like the ribs of a wounded beast, and dust rained down from the steel bones above as the ground roared with the movement of the crag brood. The echo net flickered and alarms howled, but the rhythm the den had built still pulsed through the air, steady and determined, like a giant heart refusing to die. Arya Chen stood at the heartbeat core, her fingers moving. In practice precision over the trembling holographic interface, the lines of data scrambled under static, but she could still feel the pattern beneath it, the rhythm of thousands breathing together. She whispered to herself, "Hold the rhythm. Hold the rhythm," her voice barely audible under the deep rumble of collapsing tunnels. She knew Carrot was out there somewhere in the dark, leading the outer defense team. Their signals were faint, but alive. Outside the den, Carrot moved through shadows, his fur slick with grime. His armor cracked, acid still hissing from claw marks. He led 6 humans and 3 houndborn through a broken mining corridor, using scent and tremor to navigate, while the ground above boiled with enemy movement. His eyes glowed, faintly blue from visor feedback, showing the pulse patterns that matched the echo net. Even amid chaos, the rhythm helped them move in sync. The sound of breathing became their compass as they planted the last of the decoy emitters to mislead the secondary brood. One of the humans, a young tech named Leo, stumbled, his breathing fast and panicked. Carrot reached out, placing a paw against his chest, and said, "Breathe with me, not faster, not slower. Just match the ground, listen to it." Leo obeyed, the trembling in his hands fading as his body found the rhythm again, and they continued forward. Back in the den, Arya rerouted power from the secondary grid to maintain the metronome drones. She could feel the drain as lights flickered and heat began to fade. The engineers shouted warnings about overload, but she ignored them. If the rhythm broke, the brood would locate them instantly. She opened a private channel, calling Carrot's name. Static answered, then a fragment of his voice. "We are still hunting, Den Mother. The prey is near." She felt relief spark in her chest, but it quickly turned cold as seismic sensors spiked again. Multiple burrowers moving beneath the den. Not just one brood, but many converging from below. She realized the Queen had learned faster than anyone predicted. The first breach came from the eastern tunnel, acid claws tearing through steel. The defenders opened fire, plasma bolts lighting the darkness. The air filled with smoke and screams as crag bodies spilled into the lower chambers. Arya grabbed a rifle from a fallen soldier and joined the fight. Her movements sharp and economical, trained through endless hours of combat. The rhythm still echoed in her mind. She fired in sequence. 3 shots, breath, exhale, step 1 more. Her body moved like a machine of instinct, but fear gnawed at the edges. Not for herself, but for what would happen if the rhythm failed. Carrot's team reached the outer edge of the ice shelf where the Queen's secondary nest pulsed. Like a glowing wound in the earth, the brood poured from fissures, each creature carrying sacks of burning acid. He realized they were tunneling to flood the den again, and if they succeeded, everything inside would melt. He called Arya through the "Come, we see the Queen's heart, I will draw them off." She shouted back, "Negative, you hold position." But he answered with a growl, "No, Den Mother, this is what the Alpha does. You keep the pack safe." He charged across the ice, his claws gripping slick surfaces. His howl carrying through the wind, the brood turned toward him, following the vibration of his roar. It was the oldest tactic in his kind's history. Sacrifice through sound, he knew every creature would hunt the loudest call. Leo followed behind, screaming in defiance, firing plasma bursts to keep the enemy focus away from the den. Carrot could feel the rhythm weakening behind him, the faint pulse faltering as panic spread inside the tunnels. He needed to give them time. Inside the den, Arya sensed it. She felt the heartbeat stagger, the rhythm breaking like a skipped beat, and with it came chaos. Soldiers firing out of sync, civilians crying out. The Queen would feel it in the soil. She slammed her palms on the console and shouted over the comms, "Everyone back to rhythm. Listen to me now. Inhale. 2. Exhale. 2. Hear the den. Listen to it." She switched the broadcast to the internal speakers, her voice merging with the reactor hum, a single steady cadence that filled the corridors. "Breathe with me," she said, her tone low, strong, sure. 1, 2, 1, 2. And slowly the sound of panic softened, replaced by hundreds of synchronized breaths. The lights flickered in time. The den was alive again, far out on the ice. Leo's voice cracked through. "Static, Den Mother, the rhythm, it works. They can't find you. They're following us." Carrot was limping now, his fur scorched, but he could feel it too. The rhythm behind him pulsing through the ground. He could sense Arya guiding it, every heartbeat. A command, every breath, a promise. He felt pride swell through exhaustion. She was not just human, she was pack. She was leader. He reached the final fissure. The ice glowed from molten cracks, and he saw the faint shimmer of the Queen's massive shell. Deep below, he knew what he had to do. He planted the last thermal charge into the fissure and roared his final command, "Retreat." The explosion tore through the valley, the ice shelf collapsing into itself. The shock wave rolled across the plains, and, even deep within the den, the ground heaved violently. Arya was thrown to her knees. Screens shattered, the heartbeat core dimmed to black, then slowly reignited with weak blue light. The seismic readings cleared, showing the brood signatures fading. Retreating, the Queen's core collapsing under tons of frozen debris. Silence followed, long and unbearable. Arya pressed her communicator, calling for Carrot again. No response. She called again and again, until finally through static came a single, growled word, "Still breathing." Hours later, rescue teams reached the surface and found Carrot half buried under ice, alive but barely moving. Arya met him in the recovery chamber, his body trembling from exhaustion, his voice a rasp. He looked at her and said, "The rhythm held, you kept them breathing." She smiled through tears. "You taught me how the pack never stops moving together, even when the dark tries to break us." He gave a faint laugh, almost a growl, and said, "Then maybe the galaxy will finally learn what it means to stand as one." As the den repaired and the survivors gathered once more, the story of the Echo Net spread through every world connected to the Council, the legend of the pack that fought with breath and heart instead of fear. And numbers. Arya watched the rising sun through the cracked dome, knowing the Queen was gone, but the war not yet over. She looked down at her hands, scarred and trembling, and whispered softly, "The den lives and so do we." And somewhere deep in the tunnels, the heartbeat core pulsed again, steady and strong like the rhythm of a Puppies in peace talks. The sun rose slow and pale over Bristle 9, spreading light through the haze of dust and frozen vapor that hung above the valley. The battle was over. The Crag Queen destroyed, her brood scattered into the wastelands where they would wither without her command. But the scars of the fight still marked every ridge, every broken beam of the den below. The survivors moved with quiet purpose, rebuilding, patching, tending to the wounded. No songs of victory, only the steady rhythm of those who had endured when others would have fallen. Arya Chen walked the length of the den, her boots echoing softly through tunnels that now pulsed with faint power once more, each vibration a heartbeat of life. She passed engineers working shoulder to shoulder with Houndborn builders, their voices low, their movements synchronized by habit. The rhythm had become second nature to them. At the heart of the den, the old reactor room now doubled as council chamber, where human officers and Houndborn lieutenants gathered around a holographic map, showing the surrounding systems the war had shifted. The destruction of the Crag Queen had rippled. Through the galaxy, reports came in of her offspring turning on each other without her command, creating chaos among their ranks. The Galactic Council sent transmissions filled with disbelief and cautious admiration. They wanted confirmation. They wanted proof that humans had not only survived, but led this victory. Arya listened to the chatter quietly before cutting the comm feed. She said, "We will not celebrate with speeches. We will rebuild with action." Carrot entered the chamber, then walking. Slowly, his body still bandaged, but his step steady the moment he appeared. Every soldier stood instinctively. It was not ceremony, it was instinct. The pack greeting its alpha. He nodded once and took his place beside Arya. His golden eyes softened as he looked at the map and said, "It is strange to see silence where once there was war." Arya smiled faintly. Maybe silence is what victory sounds like. Outside the den, the frozen plains stretched endless under morning light. The place where the Queen had fallen, now a lake of smooth ice that reflected the rising sun like glass. Refugees had begun to emerge from hidden shelters, forming camps around the crater. Children chased one another between melted machines, their laughter faint but alive. Arya spent her days moving among them, helping distribute supplies, repairing broken tech, and listening to their stories. Each one a reminder of what the den had protected. Every face was proof that sacrifice had meaning. One afternoon, while she was helping a medic adjust a thermal canopy, she felt a familiar presence behind her. Carrot approached his shadow long across the snow. He said, "The council ship arrives tonight. They wish to speak of peace and alliances." Arya nodded, knowing what that meant. The galaxy had seen too much blood and too many broken oaths. This time they wanted to end the cycle with treaties still. She felt unease. The council rarely offered peace without costas. The twin moons rose the council. Ship descended silver and pristine against the battered landscape, its lights cutting through the night. The council delegation emerged wrapped in ceremonial robes, followed by envoys from half a dozen species. Cameras floated around them, broadcasting live across the sectors. The den's people lined the ridge, silent, waiting for what this meeting would bring. The lead counselor, a tall figure with crystalline skin, approached Arya with a practiced smile, saying, "Commander Chen, the galaxy owes you gratitude for your bravery, for your leadership." She answered evenly, "We fought for survival, not gratitude." The counselor continued, speaking of unity and cooperation, then hesitated, glancing at Carrot before saying, "There remains, however, a matter of concern regarding the union between you and Captain Carrot. Our laws do not yet recognize such bonds between species, and now there are reports of offspring forming. This poses political questions that must be addressed before any formal accord can be signed." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Arya stood firm, her gaze unflinching, and replied, "The bond was not political. It was born in war and in trust. If the council cannot recognize that, then your laws are smaller than the courage that saved you." For a tense moment, no one spoke. Then Carrot stepped forward, towering over the counselor, his voice deep and resonant, carrying through the wind. "I stood beside this human, and she beside me. We bled together. We protected the young together by the oldest law of my people. That makes us pack. Our offspring are not questions, they are answers to the galaxy's fear that different cannot live as one. If you cannot understand that, then you are still blind to what victory truly means." The silence broke into applause. Not from the officials, but from the gathered soldiers and civilians, human and hound-born voices merging into one thunderous rhythm. The sound rolled across the plains. The counselor tried to speak again, but the noise drowned him out in that moment. Politics had no place, only unity. The next day, the council drafted a new clause called the Den Accord, recognizing interspecies familial rights under shared defense treaties. It was a small step in law, but a giant leap in meaning. Arya signed it first. Carrot added his mark beside hers, the clause leaving deep ridges in the metal plaque. The act was witnessed by every network in the spiral arm weeks past. The den became more than a fortress. It became a model. Colonies began to copy its design, combining human engineering with hound-born sensory architecture. Every new structure pulsed with the same soft rhythm. The metronome of shared breath, the galaxy called it. the heartbeat pattern. It became the foundation for rebuilding worlds torn apart by war. Arya often sat in the quiet garden they built at the center of the den, a patch of green grown under artificial sun, her hands resting over her stomach. The medics had confirmed what Carrot had already known. She carried life within her. Not a symbol, not a project, but living proof that the impossible could exist. She felt both fear and wonder in equal measure when Carrot joined her. He sat close, the warmth of his presence grounding her. He looked at her with that same unshakable calm and said, "The pups will hear both voices, they will know both songs." Arya smiled softly. "They will also know work and responsibility. You will teach them how to fight. I will teach them when not to." The days grew warmer as reconstruction spread across the valley. The refugees began returning to their homes and the den's tunnels echoed with the sound of industry, rather than war. One evening a transmission came through from distant colonies asking for training in the heartbeat method. Arya authorized open access to every file, every plan, and every rhythm sequence. She told her officers, "Share everything freely. Let every world learn to protect its children." On the final night before the den's defenses were officially decommissioned, Arya stood atop the ridge watching the stars shimmer across the clear sky. Carrot stood beside her, his fur catching the light of the moons below them. The new generation of soldiers trained in the open, their movements graceful, synchronized, their voices rising in rhythmic chant. The sound carried far across the valley like a living echo. Arya turned to Carrot and said, "Do you ever think they will stop fearing humans?" He shook his head slowly, not fearing perhaps, but they will always remember that when the galaxy was on fire, it was the humans who walked through it and refused to die. She smiled, then let them remember. As dawn broke, the den's lights flickered in harmony. One last time, a farewell signal that pulsed through the ground across the valley and up into the sky. Satellites caught it and relayed it outward until it became a wave of light moving between stars. The message was simple and clear, written in rhythm. Not words, we live. We remember, we are Pakfar. Above Bristle 9, the stars shimmered, brighter for a moment as if answering. And in the warmth of that light, Arya, Chen, and Carrot of the Houndborn stood side by side watching the horizon where war had once lived, and where now the future waited, a future that carried the heartbeats of all.